Good morning. I want to thank you for tuning in again for our service here at Antioch Baptist Church. I'm Pastor Michael Shultz. Today we're going to be studying out of the book of Genesis. If you'd like to turn in your Bibles, I hope that you will today. This is a scripture-heavy sermon today. We're going to be reading a lot of scripture. I'm just going to be simply breaking down a story for you. The title of today's message is Forgiveness. Forgiveness. And there's a heavy emphasis on the subject of forgiveness in the Bible, mostly God's forgiveness of us, but there is also an aspect or an element in the Bible of our forgiveness of our brethren and our other brothers and sisters on this earth, both Christians and not. And I think a lot of the time, one of the things that we deal with as humans here, as we await our return to be in fellowship with God and Christ, is that we don't know how to forgive, we don't know when to forgive, and we don't know why to forgive. And so I want to kind of get us an example of how and when and why to forgive, and maybe dive into this a bit more in the psychological and the spiritual aspects of forgiveness. Genesis chapter 42 is where we're going to begin today, and if you can believe it, we're going to finish in Genesis chapter 45. So we're going to cover quite a bit of literature today. The scriptures are going to do the majority of the speaking. I hope that I can simply just explain them in a way that makes sense to you. But I want to let God speak for himself today. So in Genesis chapter 42, we're going to begin reading in verse 15, but a little bit of background before we get into the passage today. We're reading about the story of Joseph and his brothers. And if you don't know the story of Joseph, Joseph was one of the 12 sons of a man named Jacob, who we also refer to as Israel. And if you've ever heard of the tribes of Israel, that's who these boys are. They're Israel's children. And so anytime in the Bible you hear about the children of Israel or the 12 tribes of Israel, these are the children of a man named Israel. They're not just the children of Israel in the sense of the nation, kind of how we call ourselves Americans. It's more like they're literally the children of Israel, kind of like how my children would call themselves the children of Michael or Shultz's. So, we have the children of Israel, the children Joseph and Reuben and Simeon and Judah and Levi and so on and so forth. All the brothers are here, but they've sold Joseph into slavery a couple of chapters before because he was very annoying to them. He was a thorn in their side. The reason that they didn't like him was because Jacob, their father, showed preference to him. He was their father's favorite son, and he was the youngest. While they wore these sheep clothes that were made out of goat skins and different things, his father had made him a special garment that was many, many colors and had been decorated and adorned in this beautiful fashion. And he gave it to the youngest. The Bible even says that he loved him more than all the other boys. And they hated Joseph for that, so they sold him into slavery. Now, an important note is they were going to kill him. But Reuben, the oldest brother, stood up, having authority over the others as the oldest, and said, we're not going to kill him. Let's sit him down here. And they actually put him in a pit where he couldn't run away and tell their dad what they were thinking. Reuben says, let's put him in the pit, leave him in there, scare him for a little bit, then we'll take him back home, and he'll be none the more of the problem. And as Joseph is in the pit, Reuben goes off to do something, and Judah, another one of the brothers, says, I've got an idea. Well, we won't kill him, because Reuben has said no, but we'll sell him into slavery. That way we'll get some money for him. His blood won't be on our hands, but we'll be rid of him. It's a great plan. And the other brothers went right along with it. Yes. And so they sold Joseph into slavery in Egypt. And Joseph's story is a wonderful one. He goes from dungeon to his destiny. If you've ever heard a sermon about Joseph, you know about this. He's in the dungeon. He interprets dreams. He ends up interpreting a dream for one of the high people in Egypt, and they get promoted and promoted and promoted to the point where he's second in Egypt to Pharaoh. And that's where we pick up the story. There's a famine in Israel where his brothers are living with their father Jacob, and Jacob sends the boys to Egypt to find some food. He says, go buy some food. And they come in contact with Joseph. This is years down the road. They don't recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognizes them. And Joseph's going to play a little game with them to try to test them and find out what kind of men they are now, years later. And he accuses them of being spies, which was a criminal offense. They could be hanged or executed for it. And so he says, you might be spies. I've got to find a way of proving you. And that's where we pick up in Genesis 42, beginning with verse 15. The Word of God says, "This is how you will be proved. By the life of Pharaoh you will not go out of here, except your youngest brother come back. So send one and let him fetch the brother, and you all will be kept in prison, that your words will be proved, whether there is any truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh, you're spies." And he put them together in the ward for 3 days. And Joseph said to them on the 3rd day, "This do and live, for I fear God. If you're true men, let one of your brothers be bound in the house of your prison, but you all go, carry corn for the famine to your houses, but bring your youngest brother back to me, so that your words will be verified, and you will not die." And they did so. And they said one to another, "We are guilty concerning our brother." Now here, they're talking about Joseph. He says, "We're guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul when he sought for us that we would not hear, and that's why this distress has come upon us." And Reuben, the oldest, answered them and said, "Did I not tell you, saying, 'Do not sin against the child,' but you would not hear me? For this reason also his blood is required." And they did not know that Joseph could understand them, because he spoke to them through an interpreter. And so he turned himself away from around them and wept, and returned to them again and communed with them. And he took from them Simeon and bound him before their eyes. Joseph was broken over the fact that these brothers knew why the hardship was coming on them. The first thing that they said when hardship came on them was, "This is happening because of what we did to Joseph." It goes all the way back, all those years. What we did has now come upon us. We did an evil thing. And Joseph, seeing that they recognized what they had done was wrong, was stirred and moved. And you can tell that he wants to forgive them. He wants to right now say, "Look, it's okay, I'm Joseph, it's okay." But he can't do that. Now, he can't just forgive them. And he can't even just forgive Reuben. Even though Reuben had done the right thing all along, he can't just forgive Reuben because Reuben is inextricably attached to the others. Now you say, why can't he just forgive them? Because Joseph has built a better life now. He's moved on and actually followed the will of God in his life, and he can't just forgive and allow evil people to come back into his life when he doesn't know what they're going to do when he gets there. And you can't just do that. When somebody has wronged you and tricked you and deceived you, you can't just keep letting them come back into your life and taking the wheel and running you off the road. There comes a time you have to take control and say, "Look, you fool me once, shame on you. But fool me twice, shame on me. I can't just let you keep ruining my life." Joseph knows that. No matter how bad he wants to forgive them, he knows, I can't just let you back into my life like that. And so he sends them back away. Now we move down to chapter 42 and start again with verse 36. Chapter 42 and verse 36. The brothers have returned home to their father Jacob, and this is what they tell him. Jacob, their father, said to them, "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more." Remember, Joseph kept him in Egypt. And he says, "Now you seek to take Benjamin away. All these things are against me." And Reuben spoke to his father and said, "Take my 2 sons. If I bring Simeon and Benjamin not back to you and deliver them into your hand, I will bring them back." And he said, "My son will not go with you. His brother is dead and he is alone. If mischief befalls him in the way that you go, it would bring my gray hairs down to the grave with sorrow." He says, "I can't let you take Benjamin. I can't let you take it. I've lost Joseph. I've lost Simeon. I can't lose Benjamin now." Did you know that it wasn't enough for Reuben to continue to take responsibility? Sometimes you'll meet people, and maybe when all of the chaos and hardship was going on, they were the only one that you felt like was level-headed and able to take a solid stance that was respectable. They were the one person in the midst that you said, of everybody, they're the only ones that I think did the right thing. And Reuben was that one. But Reuben was not enough. He knew that it was wrong from the beginning. But Joseph couldn't just let Reuben back in. He's attached. What has to happen? Read on in chapter 43 with me, the first 9 verses. The famine was terrible in the land, and it came to pass that when they'd eaten up all the corn that they brought out of Egypt, their father said to them, "Go again and bring us a little food." And Judah spoke to him, saying, "The man did solemnly protest, saying, 'You will not see my face except your little brother is with you. If you will send our brother with us, we will go down and buy some food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, 'You will not see my face except your brother is with you.' And Israel said, 'Why do you deal this way with me, as to tell the man that you had a little brother?' And they said, 'The man asked us straightly of our state, of our kindred, saying, Is your father alive? Do you have another brother?' And we told him according to the tenor of his words. How could we have known that he would say, 'Bring your brother down'?" And Judah said to Israel his father, "Send the lad with me, and we will go, that we may live and not die, both of us, and you, and our little ones. I will be surety for him. I'll put myself up as collateral for him. Of my hand will you require him. If I don't bring him back to you and set him before you, let me bear the blame forever." Now we're getting somewhere. Judah takes responsibility. He was the one that sold Joseph into slavery, and now he is the one saying, "I will take responsibility for my actions. I will bear the blame if Benjamin does not come back." Judah is learning. He's growing. He's improving. He's becoming a new man, a better person. This is what you look for when you're trying to decide whether to allow someone who's harmed you and deceived you and hurt you and left you out to dry and sailed you up the river. When you're looking at them trying to decide, should I let you back into my life? Do I become vulnerable to you again? You look at them. Are you a different person? Are you a different person now than you were when you hurt me? Judah was becoming a different person. Look on. Chapter 43, verse 26 through 34. The boys convince Israel to send their son, or to send Benjamin, their brother, with them. They come back to Egypt. They arrive. And at this point, they are so desperate to prove to Joseph that they are not spies, that they actually begin to refer to Benjamin as the gift or the present that they've brought back. This is our proof. We're not spies. This is our little brother Benjamin. And we pick up in verse 26, read through verse 34. When Joseph came home, they brought him the present that was in the hand of the house and bowed themselves to him in the earth. And he asked them of their welfare and said, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he alive?" And they answered, "Your servant our father is in good health. He is yet alive." And they bowed down their heads and made obeisance. This is similar to a form of slight worship. They bowed their heads the way that you would to a king in the old days. Similar to the way that Joseph said that they would in the dream that he had. He says, "I saw bundles of hay, and we all had one, but all of yours bowed down to mine." He knew it. He knew it was coming. Verse 29, and he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your younger brother of whom you spoke?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." And Joseph made haste, for his bowels did yearn on his brother. And he sought for a place to weep, and he entered into his chamber and wept there. And he washed his face and went out and refrained himself and said, "Set out bread." And they set on for him by himself, and for them by themselves, and for the Egyptians which did eat with him by themselves, because the Egyptians might not eat bread with the Hebrews. This was an abomination unto the Egyptians. And they said to him, And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, the youngest according to his youth, and then the men marveled on one to another. And he took and sent messes unto them from before him. But Benjamin's mess was 5 times so much as any of theirs, and they drank and were merry with him. Now, Joseph has done a lot here in this passage. He welcomes them in. He asks about their dad. He greets Benjamin, but then he runs away. He has to run away, get out of the room to weep, because again, he is so broken over them. He wants to forgive them. He wants to let them back in and accept them and become their brother again. But he's got to be careful. And so he does the only thing he can do. He tests them. That's what he does in verses 33 and 34. Look at what he does here. You might miss this in the first read. Mostly because I butchered it. Verse 33, they sat before him, the firstborn to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. What Joseph does, and he calls for them, and he sets them at the table. He says, Reuben, Reuben, you sit right here. And then he calls the next over. You come sit right here. And you come sit right here. That's your seat. You sit right there. And you sit right there. And as they're taking their seats, they sit down and they realize Joseph, this man that they've never met, has seated them in perfect order according to their age. And they're looking at each other, all 12 of them, and they're saying, how did he do that? Because they're all grown men. How could he have possibly known exactly the order in which they were born? They say that's kind of weird. But then Joseph does something even more maniacal. He gives Benjamin, the youngest, 5 times as much as all the others. He represents that he knows you're the oldest, and then you, and then you, and then you. So in terms of inheritance, you get the most, then you, then you, then you, and you get the least. And then he turns around and gives the youngest the most. What's he doing? He's testing them. This is what your father did to me. Jacob, our father, gave me more blessings than he gave any of you. And all of you hated me for it. What are you going to do when I give the blessings to Benjamin? Are you going to do again to him what you did to me? He gives them an opportunity. He plays a little trick and creates a circumstance conducive to bitterness against Benjamin. He says, I'm going to make it so that it's very easy for them to become bitter against him. I wanted to meet him. I wouldn't deal with them without him present. And now that he's here, I'm going to give him all these blessings. I'm going to create bitterness. And then he gives them a final exam. Chapter 44, verses 1 through 4. He commanded the steward of his house, saying, fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put every man's money in his sack's mouth. He'd done that the last time that they came. He gives them their money back for what they bought. But this time, verse 2, he says, put my cup, the silver cup, in the sack's mouth of the youngest, Benjamin, with his corn money. And he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. As soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away with their asses. When they were gone out of the city and not yet far off, Joseph said to his steward, get up and follow after the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, why have you rewarded evil for good? So he says, take my silver cup, the chalice that I drink from, and stick it in Benjamin's backpack. And then, when they leave, he says, go catch up with them and catch him. And say, why did you do this, Benjamin? Why did you steal? You see? He's creating an opportunity. He has made them have an opportunity and a reason to be bitter against Benjamin. And now he's creating an opportunity for them to sell Benjamin down the river the way that they did him. He says, I'm going to do this. I'm going to manipulate this in such a way that they will be in exactly the same scenario. And if they do again what they did before, they're not sorry. I'm going to give you an embittered men, and I'm going to give the embittered men an incentive to do what is wrong. And if they do it again, they haven't changed. They're no different. They're not sorry. If they do it again, they're not sorry, and they're not different. And this is the final exam. He says, in order for me to forgive them and allow them back into my life and allow them to see me as a brother and be vulnerable to them and come into this land that I have made prosperous through the famine, in order for me to accept them, I've got to know they're not going to do it again. They're not going to betray me. They're not going to hurt me. They're not going to hurt my friends and my family and my people. They're not the guys that did it the last time. They've changed. I've got to know that or I can't let them back in. And it's not that I hate them. No, it's not that I'm hateful, it's that I'm grateful. And I know what God's given me, and I'm not going to diminish it, and I'm not going to let it go because I'm being unthoughtful, because I'm being imprudent. I've got to be careful, and I've got to make sure that these men have changed. And it's the same for you. When somebody has hurt you, and diminished you, and deceived you, and left you to die, physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially, when somebody has wronged you, it's not unforgiving to not allow them to come back in and hurt you. It's thoughtful to take an opportunity and say, I can't let you keep doing this to me. It doesn't mean that you're hateful. It means you're grateful for what you have and you don't want to see it tarnished. Joseph says, I can't just let you back in my life. I've got to see that you're different. I've got to see that you're different. And so he creates this situation, this circumstance. I've made them as embittered as I can, and I'm creating an opportunity for them to hate their little brother the way that they hated me. And let's see what they do. Chapter 44 and verse 30. We're going to read through the end of the chapter. They returned to meet with Joseph and try to plead for the life of their brother Benjamin. And the one who is standing and now speaking, praying that Joseph would forgive Benjamin and take him instead as a slave to make up for the crime that was committed. It's not Reuben. You would think it would be Reuben, but it's not. It's Judah. Judah says, now I've come to your servant my father. And if the lad is not with us when I come to him, his life is so bound up with the lad's life that it'll come to pass that when he sees that the boy's not with us, he'll die. And your servants will have brought down the gray heads of your servant our father with sorrow to the grave. For your servant, now he speaks of himself, gave a surety. I became collateral for the boy to my father, saying, if I don't bring him back to you, put the blame of my father on me forever. Now I pray, let the servant abide. Let the servant abide. Let me stay instead of the lad as a bondman to my Lord. Let the lad go with his brethren. For how shall I ever go to my father and the lad not with me, lest perhaps I see the evil that comes upon my father? He says, take me instead. Even though they had every reason to hate Benjamin, even though to their eye Benjamin had done wrong, he had stolen, Judah has every reason to let Benjamin get what to his perspective looks like he deserves. And instead, he's willing to take the punishment on himself. Even though it's unjust, even though it's improper, he says, let me take the punishment instead. Judah, the one who had sold Joseph to slavery, the one whose idea it was in the first place, says, let me take the punishment instead. The punishment that he deserves. Let me. Sound like anyone you know? Jesus stands on an audacious stage, looking at the sinners who deserved all the punishment that they were about to receive. And he looks at God and he says, take me! Take me. Let's look at the first 3 verses of chapter 45 as we close. Then Joseph could not refrain himself before all of them that stood by him, and he cried, make every man leave. And there stood no man with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said to his brothers, I'm Joseph. Does my father live? But his brothers could not answer him because they were troubled at his presence. And that's a bit of an understatement. When Judah would rather give his life than let the boy that they should be envying go, Joseph knew he's learned. He's different. He's better. And this is what God does with us. When we finally come before the throne of grace and we come before God as humbly as we are possibly capable of doing, and we say, I don't even understand grace entirely, but I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I deserve punishment, but forgive me. Jesus takes our sin and imputes it to himself on the cross. It says that he took the letter of everything that condemned us and nailed it to his cross. He bore it on his body for us as a propitiation, a substitution for us endured the wrath of God. It says God crushed him. He took all the wrath. He drank down the cup of God's fury for us. And we come to God and we say, will you forgive me? Will you forgive me? Forgiveness causes disbelief. Just as the brothers stood there, astounded that Joseph was standing in front of them. And they were even a bit afraid. We sold him into slavery. What's he going to do now? And I believe we will be a bit afraid when we come before this mighty Christ. As John was, it says that he saw him and he fell at his feet as dead. We deserve to be punished. We deserve hell. We deserve the shame. But he says, no, you're my brothers. You're my brothers. When we show God, I realize what I've done. I know I deserve the punishment. The blood should be on my hands for the things that I've done. I want to change. I want to be better. I want to leave the sin in my past and become a better person. I want to be different. He says, come to me. Come to me. You'll be my brothers. Join heirs with Christ. Are you a brother of Christ? Have you accepted the invitation to become a part of the family of God? It's a wonderful story. The story of Joseph is a wonderful story, but yours can be even better. The story of a sinner who lived their lives for themselves in sin and shame, and God reached out his hand and they said, save me. I want to change. And God takes them and changes them, and he'll change you by the power of his Holy Spirit imputed to your life. He'll change you. Thank you for listening in. I'm Pastor Michael Shultz. Be blessed.